There are moments that define us. Moments when the mask slips, when true character reveals itself, when a single act of cruelty sets off a chain reaction that can't be stopped. This is a story about one of those moments. A story about pride, prejudice, and the devastating consequences of underestimating the quiet observer in the corner. What you're about to hear happened at Metropolitan Grace Hospital, one of the most prestigious medical centers in the state. The kind of place where reputation is everything, where doctors are treated like gods, and where speaking up can cost you everything you've worked for. But sometimes, just sometimes, karma walks through the door in the most unexpected form. This is the story of how one doctor's moment of cruelty was witnessed by the last person he should have ever crossed. And by the time he realized his mistake, it was far too late to take it back. Let me take you back to where it all began. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chin, 34 years old, second-generation immigrant, and one of the most brilliant young physicians at Metropolitan Grace. She'd graduated top of her class from Johns Hopkins, completed her residency at Mass General, and had been recruited to Metropolitan Grace with promises of a stellar career. But there was a problem, and his name was Dr. Marcus Thornton. Dr. Thornton was 61 years old, chief of surgery, and had been at Metropolitan Grace for 33 years. He was an institution, a legend in his own mind, the kind of surgeon whose skills were undeniable but whose bedside manner left everything to be desired. And over the past 3 decades, he'd cultivated something else, a culture of fear, a hierarchy where he stood at the top, untouchable, unquestionable. And he had very specific ideas about who belonged in his operating room. Dr. Chun had noticed it from day one. The way Dr. Thornton's jaw would tighten when she made suggestions during surgeries. The way he'd question her judgment in front of the entire surgical team. The way he'd assign her the most mundane cases while giving complex surgeries to less experienced male doctors. At first, she told herself it was coincidence, that she needed to prove herself, that she was being too sensitive. But then came the comments. Small, cutting remarks delivered with a smile. "Are you sure you can handle this, Dr. Chen? It's a bit more complex than what you're used to. Perhaps Dr. Morrison should take the lead on this one. He has steadier hands. In my day, we didn't need to hold everyone's hand through procedures. Each comment was individually deniable, but together they formed a pattern of dismissal, of diminishment, of making her feel like she didn't belong. And the worst part? Everyone saw it. The other surgeons, the residents, the nurses, they all watched as Dr. Thornton slowly, methodically undermined Dr. Chen's confidence and reputation. But no one said anything, because speaking up meant going against Dr. Marcus Thornton. And no one went against Dr. Thornton and kept their job. So Dr. Chun did what so many talented people do when faced with institutional bias. She worked harder, stayed later, took on extra cases, documented everything meticulously. She became twice as good to be considered half as competent. And she stayed silent, swallowing her frustration, telling herself that if she just proved her worth beyond any shadow of doubt, eventually the respect would come. It was exhausting, and it was slowly breaking her spirit. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a Wednesday, 7:15 a.m. Dr. Chun was scrubbing in for what should have been a routine gallbladder removal. The patient, a 57-year-old man named Robert Lancaster, had been prepped and was waiting in the OR. Dr. Thornton was scheduled to supervise, which meant he'd be watching her every move, waiting for any excuse to criticize. As Dr. Chun entered the operating room, she saw Dr. Thornton already there, arms crossed, his expression sour. 3 residents stood nearby, eager to observe and learn. And in the observation gallery above, there were several medical students, and she noticed an older gentleman in a visitor's badge, probably a family member of another patient. she thought, given special permission to observe a surgery for educational purposes. The older man had distinguished features, silver hair, and an air of quiet authority. He sat in the back corner of the gallery, nearly invisible, just watching. Dr. Chun took her position. The anesthesiologist confirmed the patient was under. The nurses had everything ready. It was time to begin. Dr. Chun. Dr. Thornton's voice cut through the room, sharp and condescending. I assume you've reviewed the imaging thoroughly? This isn't a teaching hospital where we can afford mistakes. Dr. Chun took a breath. Yes, Dr. Thornton. I've reviewed everything. Standard laparoscopic cholecystectomy. No complications anticipated. No complications anticipated, Dr. Thornton repeated mockingly. How confident. Let's hope your skills match your optimism. The residents exchanged glances. The nurses kept their eyes down. And in the gallery above, the older gentleman leaned forward slightly, his attention sharpening. The surgery began. Dr. Chun made the first incision with practiced precision. Her movements were smooth, confident, efficient. She'd done this procedure dozens of times. She navigated the laparoscope expertly, identifying the gallbladder, checking for any anomalies. Everything was going perfectly, but Dr. Thornton wasn't content to simply observe. You're taking too long with the dissection, he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. A more experienced surgeon would have been past this point by now. Dr. Chun didn't respond. She continued working, methodical and careful. Taking your time with dissection wasn't a weakness. It was good practice. Prevented complications. Are you certain you've identified the cystic duct correctly? Dr. Thornton pressed. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're dangerously close to the common bile duct. One wrong move and you could cause serious damage. Dr. Chen's hands didn't waver, though her heart rate spiked. She knew exactly where she was. The anatomy was clear on the monitor. She was nowhere near the common bile duct. I've identified all structures correctly, Dr. Thornton, she said calmly. The cystic duct is clearly visible. If you say so, Dr. Thornton said with heavy skepticism. Though I have to wonder if this overconfidence is because you haven't made enough mistakes yet to know better. One of the residents coughed awkwardly. A nurse adjusted an instrument tray with unnecessary force. And in the gallery, the older gentleman's expression had gone from interested to troubled. Dr. Chun continued the surgery, clipping the cystic duct and artery, beginning the removal of the gallbladder. Every step was textbook perfect. Every movement precise. She was demonstrating exactly the kind of surgical skill that had gotten her recruited in the first place. But Dr. Thornton wasn't finished. You know, Dr. Chun, he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than humiliating a colleague during surgery. I've noticed a trend with some of our newer surgeons. They come in with impressive credentials, fancy degrees, but lack the fundamental instincts that make a truly great surgeon. Book smart, but not operating room smart, if you understand my meaning. The implication was clear, and everyone in that room understood it. Dr. Chen's jaw tightened, but she didn't take her eyes off the surgical field. She was removing the gallbladder now, checking for any bleeding, ensuring everything was clean. Some people, Dr. Thornton continued, warming to his subject, simply don't have the natural aptitude for surgery. Oh, they can learn the techniques, follow the steps, but they'll never have that innate understanding, that surgical intuition that separates the competent from the exceptional. He paused, then delivered his final blow. It makes me wonder if we've been too inclusive in our hiring practices. Sometimes diversity initiatives mean we overlook whether someone is truly the best candidate for the position. The room went completely silent except for the beeping of monitors. Dr. Chen's hands froze for just a fraction of a second. Did he really just say that? In front of everyone? The implication that she was a diversity hire, that she hadn't earned her position, that her credentials and skills were somehow lesser because of who she was? She wanted to scream, to throw down her instruments and walk out, to finally say everything she'd been holding in for months. But she was in the middle of a surgery. Patient's life was in her hands. So she took a breath and continued working. "Dr. Thornton," she said, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts to stay professional. "I would appreciate it if we could focus on the patient and the procedure." "Oh, I'm very focused on the procedure, Dr. Chun. I'm watching every move you make, because that's my job, ensuring patient safety, even when the operating surgeon is." He paused deliberately. Learning. She had more surgical training than half the attendings in the hospital. Dr. Chun completed the gallbladder removal. She inspected the surgical site one final time, checking for any complications. There were none. The surgery had gone perfectly. Despite Dr. Thornton's constant commentary, despite the humiliation, she had done her job flawlessly. "Closing," she announced. "Well," Dr. Thornton said, "I suppose that was adequate, though I counted at least 3 moments where a more skilled surgeon would have worked more efficiently. We'll need to discuss this in your performance review." Adequate. Perfect surgery, and he called it adequate. Dr. Chun began closing the incisions, her hands steady even as her emotions roiled. She finished, stripped off her gloves, and without looking at Dr. Thornton, left the operating room. Behind her, Dr. Thornton turned to the residents. "Let that be a lesson to you all. Technical competence is important, but so is knowing your limitations. Not everyone has what it takes to be a great surgeon, regardless of what their paperwork says." The residents nodded, uncomfortable but compliant. And in the observation gallery above, the older gentleman with the distinguished features slowly stood up. His expression was no longer just troubled. It was angry. He walked out of the gallery with purpose, pulling out his phone as he went. Dr. Sarachin didn't go to the surgeon's lounge. She couldn't face anyone right now. Instead, she found an empty supply closet, locked the door behind her, and finally let the tears come. Tears of frustration, of exhaustion, of feeling completely powerless against someone who held all the cards. She'd done everything right. The surgery was perfect. And it didn't matter. Nothing mattered to Dr. Thornton except reminding her that she didn't belong. How much more could she take? How many more perfect surgeries would be dismissed as adequate? How many more times would she have to prove herself while watching less qualified colleagues get praised for doing less? She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't hear her phone buzzing, didn't see the messages coming in, didn't know that at that very moment, the older gentleman from the observation gallery was sitting in the hospital administrator's office, and that conversation was about to change everything. 3 hours later, Dr. Chun was called to a meeting. The email had been vague. "Please report to the administrative conference room at 2 p.m. Attendance mandatory." Her stomach dropped. This was it. Dr. Thornton had filed a complaint. She was going to be reprimanded for what? Doing her job well? Having the audacity to be competent while not fitting his narrow view of what a surgeon should look like. She walked to the conference room with lead in her stomach, preparing herself for whatever was coming. When she opened the door, she found herself facing a table full of people. The chief of staff, Dr. Patricia Morrison. The hospital administrator, Richard Walsh. The head of HR, Jennifer Torres. And to her shock, Dr. Marcus Thornton, looking confused and slightly nervous. "Dr. Chun," Dr. Morrison said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit down. Dr. Thornton, you as well." This was unusual. Disciplinary meetings didn't typically involve both parties sitting together. Dr. Chun sat, her mind racing. "We've had a serious complaint filed this morning," Dr. Morrison began, looking directly at Dr. Thornton. "Regarding the surgery you supervised earlier today." Wait, a complaint about the surgery? But the surgery had gone perfectly. Dr. Thornton leaned back in his chair, his expression confident. "If this is about my feedback to Dr. Chun, I was simply providing appropriate supervision and noting areas for improvement. It's my job to maintain standards. This complaint," Dr. Morrison continued, her voice sharp, "isn't about the surgery's outcome. It's about your conduct during the procedure. Specifically, your treatment of Dr. Chun." Dr. Thornton frowned. "My treatment? I don't know what you're talking about. I supervised according to protocol." Richard Walsh, the administrator, cleared his throat. "Dr. Thornton, we received a complaint from an observer in the gallery. Someone who witnessed the entire procedure and was deeply troubled by what he heard." "An observer?" Dr. Thornton's frown deepened. "We had medical students and a single visitor. I wasn't aware visitors could file complaints about surgical supervision." "This particular visitor can," Dr. Morrison said. "Dr. Thornton, Dr. Chun, I'd like you to meet someone." She pressed a button on the conference phone. "We're ready." The door opened, and the older gentleman from the observation gallery walked in. He was wearing a suit now, and his expression was grave. He looked at Dr. Chun with something like sympathy, then turned his gaze to Dr. Thornton. Dr. Thornton barely glanced at him, clearly not understanding why a random visitor was being included in an administrative meeting. "Dr. Thornton," the older gentleman said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority, "I watched your supervision of Dr. Chen's surgery this morning, and what I witnessed was not appropriate medical education. It was harassment." Dr. Thornton bristled. "With all due respect, sir, you're not qualified to judge surgical supervision. I don't know who you are, but this is an internal matter." "You're right," the man said. "You don't know who I am. Let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Robert Lancaster." The name hung in the air for a moment. Dr. Chen's eyes widened in recognition. Dr. Thornton looked blank. "I'm sorry," Dr. Thornton said with barely concealed irritation, "but that name means nothing to me. If you're just a visitor, I don't see why." "I'm not just a visitor," Dr. Lancaster said quietly. "I'm also the patient whose gallbladder Dr. Chun removed this morning." The room went completely still. "When I woke up from anesthesia," Dr. Lancaster continued, "I asked if I could view the recording of my own surgery. I have that right as a patient, and I'm very glad I did, because what I witnessed needed to be addressed immediately." Dr. Thornton's face had gone pale. You were the patient?" "I was, and I heard every word you said to Dr. Chun, every dismissive comment, every question of her competence, every implication that she didn't deserve to be in that operating room." Dr. Thornton opened his mouth, then closed it. His usual confidence was crumbling. "But there's something else you should know about me," Dr. Lancaster said, his voice growing harder. "I'm not just a patient. I'm the former chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins Medical Center. I trained at Harvard. I served as president of the American College of Surgeons, and I've performed over 10,000 surgeries in my 40-year career." The color drained completely from Dr. Thornton's face. "So when I tell you," Dr. Lancaster continued, "that Dr. Chen's surgical technique was exceptional, that her judgment was sound, that her skills are among the finest I've observed in a surgeon her age, you can trust that I know what I'm talking about. And when I tell you that your behavior was reprehensible, unprofessional, and bordered on discrimination, I'm not speaking as some uninformed outsider. I'm speaking as someone who has trained hundreds of surgeons and knows excellence when I see it. Dr. Thornton tried to speak. Dr. Lancaster, I was simply trying to ensure. You were trying to humiliate a talented surgeon. Dr. Lancaster cut him off. You questioned her competence despite clear evidence of her skill. You made comments about hiring practices and diversity that had clear discriminatory implications. You created a hostile work environment, and you did it in front of residents and medical students who will learn from your example. He paused, letting that sink in. Is that the example you want to set? That it's acceptable to undermine colleagues? To let personal bias dictate professional behavior? Dr. Thornton sat frozen, unable to respond. Dr. Morrison leaned forward. Dr. Thornton, this isn't the first complaint we've received about your treatment of colleagues. We've had multiple reports over the years from other surgeons, particularly women and surgeons of color, about similar behavior. Each one was investigated and, frankly, not pursued as aggressively as it should have been because of your seniority and reputation. But this complaint, Richard Walsh added, comes from someone whose credentials are unimpeachable, someone who witnessed your behavior firsthand and has documented concerns that we cannot and will not ignore. Dr. Chun sat in stunned silence. This was happening. After months of quiet suffering, someone had finally seen. Someone had finally spoken up. And that someone happened to be a legend in the surgical world. Dr. Lancaster turned to Dr. Chun. Dr. Chun, I want to apologize to you on behalf of the medical profession. What you experienced this morning should never have happened. You performed beautifully, and you deserve to be told that, not torn down. Dr. Chen's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing it, for saying something. I almost didn't, Dr. Lancaster admitted. I thought about just letting it go, focusing on my recovery. But then I thought about all the times you probably let it go. All the times you swallowed your anger and kept working. And I couldn't stay silent. He turned back to Dr. Thornton. You have a choice now, Dr. Thornton. You can deny everything, double down, and face the consequences. Or you can acknowledge that your behavior was wrong, commit to genuine change, and work to repair the damage you've done. But either way, this pattern ends today. Dr. Morrison nodded. Dr. Thornton, here's what's going to happen. You will be suspended from supervisory duties pending a full investigation. You will undergo mandatory training on workplace conduct and implicit bias. And you will issue a formal apology to Dr. Chun. Additionally, we'll be reviewing all previous complaints with fresh eyes. This is outrageous. Dr. Thornton finally found his voice, though it lacked its usual authority. One complaint from one person and you're willing to throw away 33 years of service? 33 years, Dr. Lancaster said softly, of creating a toxic environment that drove away talented surgeons and damaged countless careers. Yes, Dr. Thornton, one complaint from one person was all it took. Because that one person happened to be paying attention. The meeting continued for another hour, with details about the investigation, the suspension, the requirements for Dr. Thornton's return to full duties. Through it all, Dr. Chun sat quietly, processing everything. When it finally ended, Dr. Lancaster approached her. "Walk with me?" he asked gently. She nodded, and they stepped out into the hallway. "How are you feeling?" he asked once they were alone. "I don't know," Dr. Chun admitted. Relieved, vindicated, scared about what comes next. "All of those are valid," Dr. Lancaster said. "This won't be easy. There will be people who defend Dr. Thornton, who think this is an overreaction. You'll need to stay strong." "I will," Dr. Chun said. "But can I ask you something? Why did you speak up? You could have just let it go, focused on your recovery. Why did you put yourself in the middle of this? Dr. Lancaster smiled sadly. Because 40 years ago, I was where you are. A young surgeon facing someone who didn't think I belonged. Someone who made every day a battle. And no one spoke up for me. I had to fight alone. And it nearly broke me. He paused. I swore that if I ever saw it happening to someone else, I wouldn't stay silent. I'd use whatever credibility, whatever influence I had to speak up. Because silence is how these patterns continue. Silence is how talented people get driven out of careers they love. Dr. Chun nodded, tears streaming down her face now. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. Thank you is perfect, Dr. Lancaster said. Now, I have a question for you. What are you going to do next? What do you mean? Are you going to let this experience make you smaller? More cautious? Or are you going to use it to become the surgeon and the leader you're meant to be? Dr. Chun thought about that. I want to be the leader, she said quietly. I want to make sure no one else has to go through what I went through. Good, Dr. Lancaster said, because the world needs surgeons like you. Not just because you're technically skilled, though you are, but because you've experienced what it's like to be underestimated, to be dismissed. And that experience, as painful as it is, can make you a better teacher, a better mentor, a better leader. He smiled. Don't let what happened today make you bitter. Let it make you better. 3 months later, Dr. Sarah Chun stood before a conference room full of surgical residents, beginning her first lecture as the newly appointed director of surgical education. Dr. Thornton had resigned rather than complete his mandated training, and the position had opened up. Dr. Chun had been nominated by multiple colleagues and unanimously approved by the hospital board. As she looked out at the eager faces before her, she thought about that Wednesday morning, about how close she'd come to giving up, about how one person's decision to speak up had changed everything. Today, she told the residents, we're going to talk about what makes a great surgeon, and I'm going to start by telling you that technical skill, while crucial, is only part of the equation. A great surgeon also creates an environment where everyone in the OR can do their best work, where respect flows in all directions, where excellence is recognized regardless of who demonstrates it. She clicked to her first slide. We're going to discuss implicit bias in medicine, because if we don't acknowledge it, we can't address it. And if we don't address it, we perpetuate a system that drives away talented people who don't fit a narrow mold. One of the residents raised a hand. Dr. Chun, is it true that you were almost driven out of surgery by another doctor? Dr. Chun paused, then nodded. Yes, it's true. And I came very close to leaving. But someone spoke up for me. Someone saw what was happening and refused to stay silent. And that changed everything. Who was it? Another resident asked. Dr. Chun smiled. His name was Dr. Robert Lancaster. He was my patient, and he taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is bear witness, to see injustice and call it by its name, to use whatever platform, whatever credibility you have to stand up for what's right. She looked around the room. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Yes, become excellent surgeons. Master your craft. But also, be the person who speaks up when you see someone being treated unfairly. Be the person who creates an environment where everyone can thrive. Be the person who breaks the cycles instead of perpetuating them. The residents were silent, absorbing this. Because here's the truth, Dr. Chun continued. One day, each of you will face a choice. You'll see something wrong, something unjust, and you'll have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent, whether to use your voice or protect your comfort. She thought of Dr. Lancaster sitting in that observation gallery watching everything. Choose to speak up. Choose to be the one who bears witness, because you never know whose life you might change. After the lecture, Dr. Chun returned to her office and found an email waiting. It was from Dr. Lancaster, now fully recovered and back to his consulting work. Dr. Chun, it read, I heard about your appointment. Congratulations. You're going to be extraordinary in this role, not despite what you went through, but because of it. Your residents are lucky to have you, and the future of surgery is brighter because you didn't give up. With deep respect and admiration, Robert Lancaster. Dr. Chun read the email 3 times, then carefully saved it in a folder she created called Remember Why. On hard days, when the weight of leadership felt heavy, she'd read messages like this and remember. Remember that someone had seen her struggle and spoken up. Remember that silence enables harm, but courage creates change. Remember that one voice, at the right moment, can alter everything. And she'd remember to be that voice for someone else. Because that's how patterns break. That's how cultures change. That's how justice happens. Not through grand gestures or dramatic speeches, but through individual people deciding in crucial moments to do the right thing. Dr. Marcus Thornton never returned to Metropolitan Grace Hospital. The investigation uncovered a pattern spanning decades of talented surgeons driven away, careers damaged, potential squandered. He quietly retired, his legacy forever tarnished by the behavior he'd refused to acknowledge or change. Some people viewed him with sympathy, others with anger, but most felt a complicated mix of both. Because he had been a skilled surgeon once. He had saved lives. He had taught residents. But he'd also created an environment of toxicity that had harmed countless people. And in the end, his technical brilliance couldn't outweigh the human cost of his cruelty. Dr. Sarah Chin thought about him sometimes. Not with anger anymore, but with something like sadness. Sad that someone so talented had let bias and pride poison what could have been a truly great career. Sad that he'd never understand what he'd lost by refusing to see people as they truly were. But mostly, she didn't think about him at all. She was too busy building the kind of surgical program she wished had existed when she started. Too busy mentoring young surgeons who needed someone to believe in them. Too busy creating an environment where excellence could thrive regardless of who demonstrated it. 5 years after that Wednesday morning, Dr. Chun was invited to give the keynote speech at the American College of Surgeons annual conference. She stood on that stage looking out at thousands of surgeons and told her story. She told them about Dr. Thornton's harassment, about the months of quiet suffering, about the Wednesday morning when she performed a perfect surgery and was told it was merely adequate. And she told them about Dr. Robert Lancaster, about how he'd watched from the gallery, about how he could have stayed silent but chose to speak up, about how one person's courage had changed not just her life, but the lives of countless residents and surgeons who came after. The question I want to leave you with, she told the audience, is this: will you be a Dr. Thornton or a Dr. Lancaster? Will you use your power to diminish or to lift up? Will you stay silent when you witness injustice? Or will you speak? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. Because I promise you this. At some point in your career, you will face that choice. You will see something wrong. Someone being treated unfairly. Someone talented being driven away because they don't fit someone else's narrow vision of what a surgeon should look like. And in that moment, you will have to decide. Will you look away? Will you tell yourself it's not your problem? Will you prioritize your comfort over someone else's dignity? Or will you be brave enough to bear witness, to speak truth, to use whatever credibility, whatever influence you have to stand up for what's right? The auditorium was completely silent. Choose courage, Dr. Chan said softly. Choose to speak up. Choose to be someone's Dr. Lancaster. Because you never know when that one moment of bravery might change someone's entire life. The audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. And in the front row, now 72 years old but still attending conferences, Dr. Robert Lancaster stood with tears streaming down his face, applauding the surgeon whose life he'd helped save, who was now saving others in turn. After the speech, they met for coffee. Two surgeons, one retired and one at the peak of her career, talking about medicine and life and the responsibility that comes with seeing injustice. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Dr. Lancaster asked. "What's that?" "It's not just that you stayed in surgery. It's that you became the leader you needed when you were starting out. You broke the cycle. And now there are dozens of young surgeons who will never have to experience what you experienced because you're creating a different kind of culture." Dr. Chun smiled. "I learned from the best." "No," Dr. Lancaster said gently. "You learned from the worst. Dr. Thornton taught you what not to do. I just gave you permission to trust yourself and fight back. But everything you've built since then, that's all you." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Dr. Chun finally said. "Do you ever regret speaking up?" Caused a lot of upheaval. A lot of people were angry. Some people thought you were overreacting. Dr. Lancaster shook his head firmly. "Not for a single second. The only thing I would regret is staying silent and letting that pattern continue. Some people thought I was overreacting because they'd never experienced what you experienced. They had the luxury of thinking it wasn't that serious because it had never happened to them." He leaned forward. "But here's what they don't understand. Every time someone like Dr. Thornton gets away with that behavior, it reinforces the idea that it's acceptable. That power means you can treat people however you want. That some people matter less than others. And every time someone speaks up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when people push back, it sends a different message. Says this is not acceptable. Says everyone deserves dignity and respect. It says we can do better." Dr. Chun nodded slowly. "I want you to know something. That gallery observation, that moment when you spoke up, it didn't just save my career. It saved me. I was so close to believing that maybe Dr. Thornton was right. That maybe I didn't belong. That maybe I was only there because of diversity initiatives and not because I'd earned it." She met his eyes. "You gave me back my confidence, my sense of worth. And I've tried to pass that gift forward to every resident and surgeon I work with. So thank you for seeing me when I needed to be seen." Dr. Lancaster reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you for not giving up, for becoming exactly who you were meant to be, and for teaching the next generation to be better than we were." Now, years later, the story of Dr. Sarah Chun and Dr. Robert Lancaster is taught in medical schools across the country. It's used in ethics classes, in discussions about workplace culture, in conversations about implicit bias and the responsibility to speak up. Some people hear it as a story about racism and sexism in medicine. Others hear it as a story about the abuse of power. Still others hear it as a story about the importance of bearing witness. They're all right. It's all of those things. But more than anything, it's a story about choice. About the moments when we decide what kind of people we're going to be. When we choose between comfort and courage. Between silence and speaking truth. Dr. Sarah Chun is now the chief of surgery at Metropolitan Grace Hospital. Under her leadership, the hospital has become a model for inclusive excellence, where talent is recognized and nurtured regardless of background, where people speak up when they see injustice, where the culture itself has fundamentally changed. Dr. Robert Lancaster passed away 3 years ago at the age of 75. His obituary mentioned his groundbreaking surgical techniques, his leadership in the medical community, his numerous awards and honors. But Dr. Chun, speaking at his funeral, talked about something else. She talked about how he'd changed her life not through his surgical innovations or his prestigious positions, but through one moment of moral courage. One decision to speak up when it would have been easier to stay silent. One choice to use his privilege and platform to defend someone who needed defending. That, Dr. Chun told the mourners, was his greatest legacy. Not the thousands of lives he saved through surgery, though those matter. Not the surgeons he trained or the papers he published, though those matter too. But the reminder that we all have a choice in every moment to be people who speak up for what's right.
Docteur Lancaster chose courage.
And in doing so, he didn't just save my career. He created a ripple effect that has touched hundreds of lives. The residents I mentor who were inspired by this story. The young surgeons who now work in environments where they're valued and respected. The patients who receive better care because their surgeons work in supportive, non-toxic cultures. She looked out at the crowd. That's the power of one voice. That's what happens when one person decides that injustice, even when it doesn't directly affect them, is still their responsibility to address. So the question Dr. Lancaster would want me to ask you today is this. What will you do with your voice? When you see something wrong, will you speak up? When you witness injustice, will you act? When someone needs an advocate, will you be brave enough to stand up for them? Because that's how we honor his memory. Not through statues or plaques, but through our choices. Through our courage. Through our willingness to be someone's Dr. Lancaster when they need it most. The funeral ended, but the message continues. Because stories like this don't have endings. They have echoes, ripples that spread outward, touching lives, changing perspectives, inspiring action. Somewhere right now, there's a young professional facing discrimination, wondering if it's all in their head, wondering if they should just quit, wondering if anyone sees what's really happening. And somewhere right now, there's someone watching, someone who has the power, the platform, the credibility to speak up, someone who is facing a choice. Stay silent or speak truth. The question is, which will they choose? Will they be the next Dr. Lancaster using their voice?